sometimes it's hard to visualize what these battles can look like, but if you've been to a site, you can imagine troops marching in formation. Maybe if you've been in Europe to a World War II site, you can see tanks and you can put that together. But this is much harder to imagine because we don't use cavalry today in the 21st century. And 10,000 men on each side. I mean, can you just paint a picture? Now, and you've been to just about every major Civil War battle site. I have not. So maybe you could get a sense, and I know you've been a reenactor as well, so there had to be at least a few guys with horses there, and you could maybe extrapolate that. But what would this even look like of 10,000 men on each side with cavalry? Are they charging each other, or what is this?
They are. It's a much less methodical type of warfare than infantry. We've talked a little in the past about infantry tactics. They would line up in long lines, too deep. And when they went on the attack, they didn't just charge and go bonsai like you see in the movies sometimes. They would march very slowly and methodically. It was all about keeping your lines straight and keeping your gaps filled. If, let's say, you had a portion of your line where a bunch of people were killed and fell down, then you would fill in the gap. You would close ranks. It was very important to keep this solid wall of men going forward. Cavalry is completely different, obviously, because every single person's on a horse, and they are going, obviously, much faster. It's almost impossible to keep a whole lot of organization. The horses are trained to, as best they can, to not be spooked by things like cannon and by regular small arms fire, but of course they still do from time to time. So horses are running here and there. Men are getting thrown off of their horses. Sometimes your horse gets shot out from under you, and so then all of a sudden, bang, you're not cavalry anymore. You're now infantry, right? You're what they would call dismounted cavalry. So much less organized, much more, I want to say wild, but maybe wild is not the right word, but just freewheeling, kind of just fast-moving combat, very hard to keep up with what's going on. The officers are firing small arms, very small arms like pistols. Some of the enlisted men might have smaller carbines, and the Union is starting to have repeating carbines now. And I'm not sure, I can't get down to the level of the individual soldiers' arms at this one battle. I'm not real super knowledgeable about Brandy Station, but nevertheless, one thing, you kind of alluded to this, and one thing I will say is we are starting to see the rise of the Union cavalry. At the beginning of the war, the Confederate cavalry was way better than the Union cavalry in general, because it just like that was part of Southern culture, riding a horse. And of course, everybody knew how to ride a horse back then, but it was really stressed in the South. And part of the mystique of the Southern gentleman, where you would be gallant, you'd ride a horse, and people did it for sport, and they did it to impress each other. That we saw that at the beginning of the war, but over time, the Union got better and better at cavalry. And by the end, I think you could even say that the Union cavalry is actually better than the Confederate. Here, I'd say at this battle, they're about equal. But yeah, Stuart is kind of dealt a little bit of a sting here, and Stuart's pride is going to be very much wounded, and it's definitely going to affect what happens in the battle that's to come. Let me talk about Stuart real quick. Stuart, as you mentioned, is an interesting character. He was a young man. He was 30 years old at the time. He was a West Point grad. He had fought in the Indian Wars out west, and he was the picture of the cavalier, the Southern gentleman. He wanted to be a modern day knight, minus the armor, of course. But he wore a very elaborate uniform. He wore a fancy hat with a big feather plume in it, and he also had this epic beard. I mean, you see pictures of him, you can't even see his mouth at all. That's a beard and a mustache, I tell you what.
Have you ever had a problem with your teeth that you always wanted to get fixed? Maybe you didn't get orthodontia when you were growing up, or you stopped wearing your retainer. Well, I have an option that can help. For simple teeth straightening, you won't need to go through the hassle or long-term treatment of wire braces. And you can do it all from the comfort of your own home. It's a new company called Candid. Candid makes the process of straightening your teeth convenient and easy by having the customer take the process into their own hands. You get accessible and affordable orthodontic care and work with a network of highly trained orthodontists who review your case and direct your aligner plan. Basically, if you use Candid, you'll have straighter and brighter teeth in an average of 6 months, and this costs 65% less than braces. There's no office visits, everything is delivered to your home. You get incredible customer service. Candid offers support through email, phone, or video calls to answer any questions you have and walk you through the process. And Candid only uses orthodontists for their plan recommendations. So here's a breakdown of how it works. Candid sends you a modeling kit in the mail so that you can take impressions of your teeth. After you send back your impressions, Candid's network of orthodontists reviews your specific case and provides you with a 3D preview of what your treatment will look like. After you receive your 3D preview, you decide if you want to move forward with the alignment plan. Then you receive an aligner that's sent directly to your home and customized specifically to straighten your teeth. Again, Candid's treatment time is an average of 6 months and will literally save you thousands of dollars compared to more conventional methods. Right now, Candid is giving History Unplugged listeners a special discount. If you go to candidco.com/unplugged, you'll save 25% on your modeling kit. That's candidco.com/unplugged to get 25% off the price of your modeling kit. One more time, that's candidco.com/unplugged. And I think, didn't he march in a bunch of parades, him and his men, on the way up to Brandy Station? Like all the pageantry or...
He definitely liked to do that, yes. I'm not sure if he did exactly at this time. He probably did. I mean, you could just bet on that and you'd probably be right. He really liked publicity. He liked to see his name in the papers. He was definitely one of Lee's most trusted subordinates. He was in charge of all the cavalry in the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, and he was very good at intelligence gathering. But as I said before, his pride was stung. So let's move on with Lee moving north. Lee started to move his army to the north, and they moved very quickly. They tended to move faster than the Confederate Army. I'm sorry, I'm getting them all mixed up. The Confederates moved fast. The Union tended to move slow.
Right.
We've seen Jackson's foot cavalry. Those men, the ones that survived, are part of this army, even though Jackson is gone. On June 16th, the Confederates begin crossing the Potomac, and they start to fan out over southern Pennsylvania. They cross Maryland. Maryland at this point is very thin, so it doesn't take long to get from Virginia through Maryland and into Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania, this part of the country, is rich in farms. You can imagine the Confederates are licking their lips thinking, oh, man, they're talking about bacon, and they're talking about ham, and they're talking about beef, and all this good stuff they're going to steal from the Yankees. Actually, they're not going to steal it. They do seize food, and they do pay for it, but they pay for it with Confederate money, which is pretty much useless in the North. So thanks a lot, man. Yeah.
Monopoly money, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, you might as well, walk into a restaurant somewhere in the U.S. and give them pesos or something. It's not going to work.
I've seen plenty of Americans try to do things with dollars in countries where it doesn't work at all. So, yeah, it's not as implausible as you can imagine.
Yeah, well, that's all they had. They probably had some greenbacks stowed away somewhere, but they're not going to depart with that. And they also here's a really sad thing that happened. This is tragic. Whenever they found free blacks, of whom there were quite a few, they seized them and they sent them south into slavery. They had a very hard line about slavery. We're going to take a little bit of an excursus about African American soldiers and sailors in a future episode, so I'll save that for then. But I'll suffice it to say now that whenever they caught any kind of free blacks, whether they were in the army or whether they're not in the army, sometimes they would just kill them. But usually that wasn't very profitable. They would just send them to the South, and they'd be returned to slavery or put into slavery for the first time in some cases. All right. So General Hooker, still the Union commander, he realizes that he wants to capture he tells Lincoln, because he knows Lee is moving to the north, he wants to turn around and go south and capture Richmond. And Lincoln says, no, you dummy. That would be an idiotic thing to do. No, he didn't say that. I'm just kidding. Lincoln was much more polite. Lincoln said, go after Lee. What's the point of taking the Confederate capital if Robert E. Lee and 75,000 men are marching all over the North? And who knows, they could even attack Washington. Hooker quarreled with Lincoln about other issues as well as this, and he finally submitted his resignation, which Lincoln gladly accepted. Lincoln was really hoping. Lincoln didn't like firing these guys. They all had their supporters within the Northern public, but Lincoln realized, I can't have this guy, first of all, who lost his head in this battle that he should have won at Chancellorsville, and second of all, he's constantly quarreling with me. So Hooker is out, and Lincoln, I keep saying the wrong people. Lincoln has to find a new commander. So on June 27th, he appoints one of the corps commanders named George Gordon Meade, and he makes him the commander of the Army of the Potomac. This is the fourth commander of the Army in just 7 months. Meade was another West Pointer. He had worked his way up through the Army ranks, and he had done well, but he had a really bad temper, and he had these big bug eyes, and people called him the damned old goggle-eyed snapping turtle.
Goggle-eyed snapping turtle. Wow.
Not the most beloved man in the Army, but competent. He had done well at all the lower levels, so let's give him a chance now. And one thing you can say, he was good with logistics. He was good with topography. He understood the value of good ground, and that's really going to come in handy not too far in the future. He was a former engineer, so very, very intelligent man. Let's see how he does as an Army commander. Now, let's talk one more time about Stuart real quick. General Stuart, he was, as we said, stung by his failure to defeat the Yankees at Brandy Station, and he's determined to redeem himself. So he does this crazy thing, or I guess I shouldn't evaluate it. Don't evaluate it as a historian, but he makes a long ride around the Union Army. He and his cavalry troop, they go all the way around the Union Army, which is huge. The Union Army has like 100,000 people, or more. And it takes him a very, very long time to make this complete run around the Army. And this deprives Lee of valuable intelligence. Lee doesn't hear from Stuart. Every day, Lee's thinking, where is Stuart? Where is Stuart? Where's Stuart? I'm blind. I don't know where the Union Army is going, how many people they have, don't know who's in command. And because there's always, there's a shakeup. Once Meade is elevated to the head of the whole army, somebody has to replace Meade, and so on and so on. Plus you have people killed. Lee finally does learn about Meade's appointment, and he learns about the Union march northward, but instead of learning them from Jeb Stuart, which he should have done, he learns them from an actor.
How was he going from one theater performance to another, or how does this work?
Yeah, I'm just making my way through town from performance to performance. I thought I'd stop by and say hi. No, I'm just kidding. He was actually, this actor was named Harrison, and he worked for Longstreet. He was former actor. He wasn't doing a lot of acting these days, but he was working as a scout. Once Lee realizes that Meade is coming his way, he orders his army to reconcentrate, and their orders are to meet at a small town called Gettysburg, which is obviously in Pennsylvania. Let me stop and let's just go ahead and get this out of the way now, because I know some of our people that are listening are saying, talk about the movie. So you know me, if you've been listening to this series, I love movies about history.
Yep, take a shot.
And we might as well, I'm going to be constantly referring to this. There is a fantastic movie called Gettysburg. If you haven't seen it, you must see it. It's long. It is really long. It is more than 4 hours long, but it is well worth it. It's one of the best historical movies I've ever seen. It is based on a book, which I also highly recommend. The book is called The Killer Angels. It came out in, I think, 1973, 74, maybe. And it actually won the Pulitzer Prize by a man named Michael Shara, Shaara. So look that up, folks. The Killer Angels by Michael Shara. That's the book. And it's written from the perspective of all the different commanders. So there'll be a chapter where you get to get into Lee's head, and a chapter where you get to get into General Meade's head, and then you get to get into Longstreet's head, and so on. So you're seeing the different perspectives of all the different commanders, and it is my favorite historical novel I have ever read. So Killer Angels, and the movie Gettysburg is based on it. But even though it is a movie that is based on a fictional book, it's still completely accurate in the way they portray Civil War combat and a lot of the dialogue between the characters is actual dialogue that they said. Others is speculation, but it's just really, really, really good. And there's a fun